Today I introduced a motion in the House of Commons to do something that should have happened a long time ago, and that is ensure that Canadians are safe from and justice is brought to those who have chosen to act as ISIS terrorists. I've got two clips for you to watch. The first one is my speech in the House of Commons, and the second is the press conference that I had talking about the motion. It's long overdue for this government to act. Watch as I work hard for you in Ottawa today.
The world has rightly feted Nadia Murad, one of the strongest women in the world, with the Nobel Peace Prize for the work she has accomplished in bringing attention to the need to eradicate one of humanity's oldest and most potent weapons in any conflict, rape. While on behalf of Canadian Parliament today I congratulate her on this achievement, I can't help but feel as though we in this place are letting it ring hollow. Vanity Fair magazine, after learning of Murad's prize, ran a story entitled, "This year's Nobel Peace Prize reflects the Me Too era." They couldn't be more wrong. The key difference between those who have been under the spotlight of Me Too, the long list of Hollywood actresses, political staffers, and most recently Christine Blasey Ford, have presented their stories and the Western media and lawmakers have reacted, from marches in the streets to high-profile trials to bills here in this place to change our own sexual harassment code of conduct. Those who have come forward in Me Too have seen, while arguably imperfect, some sort of movement on the part of our legislatures, courts, and society to acknowledge their plight and act to remedy. The same cannot be said for Murad and her people. What of justice for them? There has been none. That is because in our position of privilege here in this place, in the glittering halls of Hollywood institutions, in our newsrooms, and in our Western academic halls, and in elite think tank gatherings, it has been easier for us to give Nadia an award for her courage and link her to the people, the women of her and her people, to the Me Too movement, rather than to take action to bring justice. And that is wrong. Rape and sexual violence in war is a weapon that we rarely acknowledge, much less take action to end. So to all who believe that Me Too has somehow begun to shift our nation towards a more gender-equitable society, one where there is less sexual violence and more empowerment for women, then why are we not in Canada doing everything in our power to bring those complicit in the use of rape as a weapon against Nadia and her people to justice? To bring them justice, Canada must first lead the charge in condemning rape as the most potent weapon known to mankind. Time magazine recently recounted a story of a doctor who treats the survivors of rape in a war zone. She has stitched up the tears and she has retrieved inserted objects. She has repaired flesh seared by the heat of a bullet fired inside a vagina that by some miracle or curse didn't kill but crippled for life. Her work is vital. Women with fistulas, tears between the vagina, the anus, the bladder, and the bowel, from rape cannot retain their urine or feces. And no matter how often they clean, they smell. They are shunned by their communities, and they are unwelcome in church. Like a dirty bomb, rape as a weapon of war is so much more powerful than the immediate damage that it yields. Rape as a weapon of war spreads venereal disease. Rape as a weapon of war renders women sterile. It ends childhoods. Rape as a weapon of war results in children who bear the stigma of rejection of their mothers, their communities, and constant reminders of the conditions of their conception and of their bloodlines. Rape as a weapon of war results in women being ostracized from their communities as impure, as having done enough to resist it, as if having somehow have asked for it, or worse, implied that they enjoyed it. Rape as a weapon of war disconnects women from their faith communities. It destroys marriages, with husbands being unable to cope with children conceived in rape, so-called impure wives, wives who are suffering from the trauma of sexual violence, being unable to participate in intercourse without being re-traumatized. It kills, and when it doesn't, many of its wide-ranging victims wish it had. It causes suicide. And rape as a weapon of war is a means to genocide. Sherry Russell Brown in the Berkeley Law Review summarized rape as genocide as follows. Genocidal rape is not rape out of control. It is rape under control. It is also rape unto death, rape as massacre, rape to kill, and to make the victims wish they are dead. It is to be seen and heard and watched as told to others, rape as spectacle. It is rape to drive a wedge through a community, to shatter a society, and to destroy a people. And this is the rape that Nadia and her people have suffered. Yet there are those who are complicit in using this weapon who walk free in Canada as though nothing has happened. Where is the outrage of Me Too and our so-called Canadian feminist-in-chief for them? To end rape as being used as a weapon of war, Canada must first acknowledge it as such. then we must destroy it as a weapon. And we do that by bringing those who use that weapon or who are complicit in its usage to swift and immediate justice. Dr. Denis Mukwege, Nadia Murad's co-Nobel Peace Prize laureate, states that establishing and implementing laws that hold perpetrators accountable is one of the most important ways to de-arm those who consider using this weapon. His foundation states, "Law serves as an effective tool to end and prevent rape as a weapon of war. When laws are implemented and enforced, more survivors are able to access justice and more perpetrators will be held accountable. Law enforcement can deter perpetrators and may help to end the cycle of impunity, which otherwise fuels future crimes. If perpetrators fear punishment, they are more likely to end the practice of using rape as a weapon of war. Legitimate law and legal structures also give victims confidence to demand their rights and feel less wronged. Yet here in Canada, our government has taken precious little action to acknowledge this truth, much less action to enforce it. Every time one of us stands in here and minimizes the need to place justice first, or worse, places the reintegrations or feelings of an ISIS terrorist ahead of the need to de-weaponize genocidal rape, we fail its victims. And make no mistake, every person who chose to act as an ISIS terrorist is complicit in the use of this weapon. In her book, Nadia bluntly outlines every person, every Canadian who chose to act as an ISIS terrorist is complicit in the genocidal rape of her and her people. And she is right. I dream about one day bringing all the militants to justice, not just the leaders, but all the guards and slave owners. Ali Shamu Aldi, a young Yazidi survivor, said, "When I see other countries of the free world take charge and stand with humanity, it means that justice will be served, and those of us who survived will have some relief." Canada can do so much more. Today, Conservatives issued a statement calling on the government to take several specific actions to bring immediate justice to the survivors of ISIS, and so many of my colleagues will talk about them. But I'd like to focus on one specific item. Processes, both here in Canada and in the courts of international law, to bring perpetrators of atrocity crimes to justice are slow and rarely work. They fail victims and prevent them from returning home. Canada should lead reforms to ensure justice is swift, both within our own domestic policy and abroad. We can't purport to stand for human rights as Canadians without demanding change to the processes that allow those who use rape as a weapon of war to go unpunished. This isn't just about one singular bad guy or leader. This is about the fact that state actors are no longer the heads of conflict. And those who go, as Nadia said, and willingly choose to participate, to fight, to turn a blind eye to sexual slavery, first and foremost only deserve one thing, and that is justice. We can't sit here and look into the eyes of these women and do anything other than commit to them with the bottom of our hearts as human beings that we will bring them justice. That is what each and every one of us should do. And for 3 years, this government has stood here and failed to acknowledge that it is incumbent upon them to do so. If laws need to be changed, then change the laws. If processes need to be changed, then change the processes. If the international community needs to change, then it needs to change. We cannot be complacent. Canada should also support initiatives which are taking concrete action to bring justice to women whose bodies through rapes have been used as a weapon of war. And Canada should acknowledge Nadia and Ali's truth, that every person who took up arms with ISIS is as complicit as its leaders and must face justice. If never again is not to ring hollow, if it's not just a phrase that we utter when convenient, then we must act. If we are to end rape as a weapon of genocide, we cannot allow those who supported ISIS in its genocidal rape to roam our country with impunity as though nothing happened. If we are to call ourselves feminists, then Me Too has to bring justice to every Yazidi, to every woman and every man and every village and every town and every religious community and family that has been destroyed by weaponized rape. For Nadia and her people, justice will only be final when those who wield rape as a weapon of war suffer greater consequences than those who were subject to its abuses. It falls to us here today to see that this happens.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her speech, and I agree with her. I agree that women's voices are so very important, and that violence against women is a way to silence those voices. So, for me, I want to know why the spending even just was cut for women's groups here in Canada. Even to hear those women's voices here in Canada under the previous government, that was made far more difficult. Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Our government increased funding to the RCMP and national security agencies from the period that we were in government. We sent our men and women in uniform to stop the genocide that was happening against ISIS, and we strengthened laws to close the intelligence to evidentiary gaps to ensure that people would be brought to justice. What is extremely disheartening for me and extremely disgusting for my colleague opposite is to stand here with crocodile tears and purport to stand up for this and blame this on another government rather than looking inwardly at herself and asking what she could do in her government appointment to force her government through her own courage to do something. This government has done nothing. She's had colleagues in a moment where every single other one of her colleagues stood up and voted against a motion to declare this genocide happened. A few of them did, and I commend them for their courage. But her question today is an abdication of responsibility. We can't stand here and purport to be feminists. We can't stand here and support to say, wrap ourselves in the cloak of Me Too, point to a previous government after 3 years have passed and refuse to take action. And that's why this motion is in front of Parliament today. It's to say that this government has a fiduciary responsibility to protecting human rights by tabling a plan to bring these people to justice. And for her to not stand up here, and I hope she redeems herself in her speech by saying what she will do, what she will push her government to do, to recognize the fact that there are problems in our law, there are problems in our processes that allow these people to not come to justice.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Questions and comments? The member for Belleuil-Chambly.
And indeed, we supported the motion that she mentioned, recognizing the genocide being committed by ISIS, and certainly share the objective that more needs to be done to put these criminals, these terrorists behind bars. That being said, she mentioned something in her speech about needing, if laws needed to be changed, then change them, which is certainly a fair sentiment and one that we agree with. So my question would be this: when we look at, for example, some of the changes in law that have happened over the last number of years, in particular relating to the work that CSIS does to keep Canadians safe, and I'm thinking specifically of threat reduction powers, and some have put forward this notion that I agree with, which is to say that obtaining these threat reduction powers with the judicial authorization, which would allow CSIS to breach the charter with the approval of a judge. Some have said that that makes it more challenging for law enforcement to do its job to collect evidence that it requires to facilitate prosecution of these individuals. And so that's where that intelligence to evidence gap that she mentions is actually widened, not closed. And so I'm just wondering what my colleague believes the government should be doing in terms of legislation to close that intelligence to evidence gap that has actually, in my opinion, widened over the last number of years.
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Much of the processes that were put in place to bring actors of genocide and atrocity crimes to justice were put in place in the wake of World War II, when state actors were at the head of violence, and that is no longer the case. ISIS is not a state actor. It is a network of terrorists that not only committed genocide against the Yazidi people in Iraq, but have carried out threats to the Western world. So our processes need to reflect this reality. This is why I'm deeply concerned that the government has made it harder and put roadblocks in place, for example, for the RCMP or the judiciary to use tools such as peace bonds to stop people who are highly suspected of terrorism. They've actually made that more difficult. Bill C-59, which is currently being considered in the other place, actually reduces the powers in many ways of Canadian security agencies to information share to act quickly to stop threats of these people when they arise. This is not, and this flies in the face of testimony of experts on how we deal with this. So to me, the government is going in the opposite direction. Rather than looking at a new global context, the reality of what conflict looks today, they're saying there's nothing to see here, folks, and actually reducing the powers of our law enforcement agencies to be able to keep Canadians safe and bring the perpetrators of atrocity crimes to justice. Good morning. We're here today because Canada can and must do more to prevent genocide and to bring the perpetrators of crimes of humanity to justice. It is not enough to say never again when we commit to preventing genocide. We must take action. This is why it's so important to bring ISIS terrorists to justice. This is also why we will be debating in the House of Commons a Conservative motion today that calls on Justin Trudeau's government to immediately bring justice to Canadians who fought as an ISIS terrorist overseas or participated in any terrorist activity. In August of 2014, August launched an attack across the Sinjar region of northern Iraq. The area is primarily inhabited by the Yazidi people, a long-established ethnic and religious minority group condemned by ISIS because of their beliefs. I can still remember the first time I heard about the genocidal atrocities committed against the Yazidis in northern Iraq, and I remember the tales that were told by the survivors of genocidal rape and enslavement and the horrors of captivity that many Yazidis, specifically women and girls, experienced under ISIS. Not only has ISIS committed an ongoing genocide against the Yazidi people and other minority groups in the region, but they have also attacked other groups, killed innocent people, and claimed credit for terrorist activities in our Western world. The Yazidi people and all others devastated by ISIS deserve justice for the atrocities committed against them. Yet in recent days, we have heard of Canadians who have left our country to act as ISIS terrorists, seek to return home to Canada as though they did nothing wrong. We know of Abu Hussein, from the podcast Caliphate, who is a Canadian who has confessed to have left our country to fight with ISIS and now walks the streets of Toronto free. And yet, we have not seen any charges laid for the over 60 ISIS returnees that we now know who walk free in Canada. This is why today Canada's Conservatives have put forward a motion to demand action from the Canadian government so that justice can finally be served. The Liberals have had 3 years to take action in this regard and have failed to do so. They have prioritized the reintegration of these terrorists as opposed to finding ways to bring them to justice, and this is wrong. Today, Andrew Scheer's Conservatives call upon Justin Trudeau to do the following. Focus first on bringing the perpetrators of genocide and terrorist acts to justice and ensure that courts have access to evidence gathered against suspected terrorists. Strive to keep Canadians safe from those who are suspected of committing such acts of terrorism or genocide abroad but have returned to Canada by ensuring that security agencies would be adequately resourced to provide high levels of monitoring and surveillance of their activities in Canada. Encourage greater use of tools to place conditions on those suspected of terrorist or genocidal activities, such as peace bonds, which can include conditions such as wearing an electronic monitoring device, returning to and remaining at their place of residence at specified times, and controlling social media use. Liberals are making it harder for security officials to monitor suspected terrorists by changing the rules around peace bonds. Processes to bring perpetrators of atrocity crimes to justice are slow, fail victims, and prevent them from returning home. Canada should lead immediate reforms to ensure justice is swift. Canada should also support initiatives which are taking concrete action to bring justice and treatment to women whose bodies through rape have been used as a weapon of war. And of course, this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. We have just seen a very brave and courageous Yazidi woman, Nadia Murad, be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts to bring attention to this issue. Yet both domestically here in Canada and internationally, the systems that we have to bring people to justice are not adequate. And finally, support initiatives such as the one being proposed in Ontario to ensure that terrorists who have returned to Canada are restricted from taking advantage of Canada's generous social programs as part of their reintegration. To date, this government, under Justin Trudeau, has failed to take action, and Andrew Scheer's Conservatives are calling on the Prime Minister to immediately table a plan to serve justice to anyone who left our country to fight with this terrorist organization. Thank you.